Our scripture today is the 46th Psalm. God is our refuge and our strength, who from of old has helped us in our distress. Therefore, we fear nothing. Even if the earth should open in front of us and the mountains plunge into the depths of the sea, even if the earth's waters rage and foam and the mountains tumble with its heaving, there is a river whose streams gladden the city of God, the holy dwelling of the Most High. God is in its midst. It will never fall. God will help it at daybreak. Though nations are in turmoil and empires crumble, God's voice resounds and it melts the earth. The Holy One Sabaoth is with us. Our stronghold is the God of Israel. Come, see what the one who is has done. God makes the earth bounteous. God has put an end to war. From one end of the earth to the other, breaking bows, splintering spears, and setting chariots on fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted upon the earth. The Holy One Sabaoth is with us. Our stronghold is the God of Israel. Ancient words from our tradition for our present day understanding. Thanks be to God.
Well, I want to add my thanks to all the people that are logged in either on YouTube or on Zoom. We're also anxious to get back together again. So thank you for getting as close as possible. It can be a pain. I understand it's not the same thing, but so today we're looking at Psalm 46, and I wouldn't blame you if you've already kind of given up on hope for the sermon even before it begins. There's something kind of hard to swallow right now under current conditions about that idea that God is this impregnable fortress and that nothing can get through to harm us. That's kind of hard to believe right now with COVID, with so much hatred and division in the country, with the global warming situation going on. It seems like a lot of things are getting through the fortress to hurt us, and I wouldn't blame you if you have trouble believing that God protects us, and maybe even sometimes have trouble believing that God cares. We're going to look at all of that. When I see Psalm 46, I go straight to Luther's hymn, and I really appreciate David Mark's rewording some of it. It goes, God is our refuge and our strength. That's David's version. The original Luther's hymn goes, a mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Then he adds this stuff about the world being filled with devils, which isn't in the psalm. Luther projected a lot onto the text. But then he says, let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abideth still. And even as a little boy singing that hymn in church, I wondered if God is such a strong fortress, then why do we have to let goods and kindred go? Obviously, there's a tension here. But I hope that you will give yourself permission to honestly ask that question of how do we talk about any kind of care that's given, any kind of protection that's given. When we look around us and we see so much pain, when, so frustrating not to be with other people, and we can feel so alone, so abandoned. We lose friends and we're not able to be there at the hospital as they're dying, or even sometimes to go to the service, and we just feel so left behind. I think it's important to realize that the Psalms are poems. They're sacred poems, and they're not speaking literally. I always like Thomas Merton's, I call him Tom Merton as though I knew him. I didn't. Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, said that the purpose of the Psalms is not to tell us what to be, but to teach us who we are. My image has always been that there's maps of the heart that take us, deeper into feelings that we have, good and bad, and it kind of reveal to us what is in there. And so what Merton said of Psalm 46, as I remember, is that it's saying that we live in two worlds at one time. We live deep within us in the promised land and all around us in a kind of desert. And the spiritual life is trying to build the bridge between the two of those. Unlike Luther, the psalmist is pretty honest about what happens in the world. The description there is pretty stark, where it goes, where it talks about God is our refuge and our strength. But it says, even if the earth should open up in front of us and the mountains plunge into the depth of the sea, even if the earth's waters rage and foam and the mountains tumble with its heaving. So it's clearly not talking literally. It's clearly not saying that we aren't going to have bad things happen to us. It describes the world pretty pessimistically, pretty graphically, at least very realistically. But then it says something very mystical. It describes all that chaos and then says, but a river runs through it. I don't know if you ever saw the movie. I took a couple of quotes from the movie, A River Runs Through It. Maybe I like it because one of the stars is a Presbyterian minister in the movie. But it's a story of this minister who's a fly fisher in Montana and two troubled sons and lots of relationship problems. And it talks about all of the problems and then loss. But all of it is within this kind of metaphor of the river, with this father standing in this river. It goes, in our family, there was no clear line between religion and fly fishing. We lived at the junction of great trout rivers in western Montana, and our father was a Presbyterian minister. That's the part I like. And a fly fisher who tied his own flies and taught others. He taught us about Christ's disciples being fishermen, and we were left to assume, as my brother and I did, that all first-class fishers in the Sea of Galilee were fly fishermen, and that John the favorite was a dry fly fisherman. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds funny. It says, eventually, all things merge into one. As the movie goes on, the sort of the poetry. It goes, all things merge into one, and a river runs through it. He says, at the time, I did not know that stories of life are often more like rivers than books. He said, many of us would probably be better fishers if we did not spend so much time watching and waiting for the world to become perfect. And here's the part that I want to lift up. He said, I sat there and forgot, talking about like all these people that he's lost in the course of the movie. So I sat there and forgot until what remained was the river that went by and I who watched. Eventually the watcher joined the river and there was only one of us. I believe it was the river. I think that kind of sense of using a river as an analogy, it's very Taoist. In Taoism, instead of having the idea of a personal God, there's a kind of a sense of a river that flows through things, shaping them gently. And I kind of think that's the temper of this psalm, that when we look around us, we see chaos, we see despair, we see division. But if we can get still and go deeper inside of ourselves, if we can stop dividing things up into this, what we like and what we hate, what we fear and what we want, if we can stop projecting our story and just sit with what is, there's a comfort and a healing there. I always think of it as like storms on the ocean, where on the surface of things, everything's complete chaos, but the great beasts in the ocean go deep. And if you go deep enough, even in a storm, there's a peace in there. In this Psalm 46, what you will not be able to see in English, you can check it out if you want to study it, but it starts with the ordinary word for God that might be used, and then it moves to the holy name. So it talks about all of this stuff happening. And then after you become still, there's this sense in the ordinary kind of understanding of God, people think of God as a being, but in the mystical sense, and I think in the sense of the divine name, it's talking a profound depth of being itself. There's something, I mean, it's easy and it's fun to think of God just as another human being with a lot of power. But the problem in despair is that a hypothetical person isn't always very helpful. Another way to understand the divine name is an invitation to the depths of your own being that go into life, into the cosmos, and to realize that you're being invited to go more profoundly into life here and now. I've said so many times before, but I think it's important to realize the divine name is not a noun, it's a verb. It's an experience, it's not a concept. It means to be. And I think what the symbol can remind us of is that we're never left behind, we're never abandoned, that if we can go deeper than the storms that affect us, that there's always some peace that's there, some healing that's there. One of the images I come up with when I try to think of this divine name and the experience that it's talking about is when I was learning to swim as a kid, like you have no sense of your own buoyancy. And so like drowning is like a terrible fear. And when you find yourself over your head in the water, then you thrash and you try to grab the water to get support. And I think that happens with life too, because life is change. And in that chaos, we try to grab something to prop ourselves up. And it's more about finding our buoyancy. But we can't trust that. And so touching the ground, like we can get in shallow enough water where we can touch the ground, it brings us a sense of peace and safety that I think this symbol of God, of touching the ground of things, of remembering that's our source, that there's a peace in that. Another example I think of is have you ever had a dream where it was a horrible dream? Maybe you had a bear eating one leg and a shark eating another leg somehow. Dreams don't always make sense. And you woke up and you think, oh, thank God, I'm not being eaten right now. And then you go back into the dream somehow, at least maybe not that dream, but a lot of times we'll wake up from dreams and then go back into the dream. And even if it was an unpleasant dream, it can become pleasant if we remember we're the dreamer, not the dream. I think this calling deeper into our own being to find being itself is a kind of touching the earth, a kind of realizing that even if we're not in control of things, our source is beyond what is happening to us. As I said, this sounds very Taoist, and whenever I hear it, I think of there's in the Tao Te Ching, number 50, it says, one who knows how to safeguard life can go through the country without protection against the rhinoceros and tiger. The sage may enter into battle without fear of the sword. The rhinoceros finds no place wherein to drive its horn. The tiger finds no place wherein to fix its claws. The sword finds no place wherein to thrust itself. Now, what I think it's saying there is that when we live in the ground of things, we realize we're not really on the line, that we belong to being, and we are going to die. We are going to go back into the whole of things. There's no way around that. But there's a kind of peace once we accept that, when we realize that no amount of running, no amount of fear is going to keep us from returning to the whole of things. And even more importantly, when we realize the home of things, I mean, the ground of things is our home, it interconnects us to all beings, the ones that we've loved and lost. That what is a myth is the separateness. So to me, there's a great piece in this, the Taoist poem. It's not really saying that you can go and sit in the rhinoceros cage and not get gored. You will get gored. But there's a part of you that's deeper than what happens to you, I think is what it's saying. And when the psalmist says there's a mighty fortress, it's realizing that in the grounds of being itself, out of which you come, you're absolutely safe from what happens. And the way you get to that, it says, is be still and know I'm God. In so many traditional religions, and particularly Western religions, the idea is you're supposed to believe something, you're supposed to grasp something, you're supposed to learn something. And what I love about mysticism, and particularly Eastern mysticism, is what it says is there's no way that you can grasp the whole of things. What you can do is relax back into it. And I like that idea of faith as not holding on to a belief, but relaxing and trusting into life, into the reality, and into what is. Again, I think this symbol of a voice coming from a burning bush was very carefully crafted. I think the name God, which means to be, is very carefully thought out to try to rescue us from what has happened to the symbol as a person somewhere else, something yet to be, that it calls us, it's an invitation to touch reality. It's a reminder to go deeper and more profoundly into what is and find a peace beneath the storms. As Thomas Merton said, to realize that we are both in a desert, but we're also in the promised land at the same time. Our problems are still there, just like when we return to a dream. But there's a difference, a profound difference, because we have a context. When we think of God not as a being, but as being itself, and ourselves as expression of that being, we realize that it's okay to be sad when we lose people and things in life and to grieve that. But we don't have to fall into despair, that we can get frustrated and angry when things don't happen right. But when we remember being itself, there's no point in being bitter for our whole lives. We can feel alone, lonely, wish other people were here. But when we remember being itself, we don't feel abandoned. And most importantly, we realize that always, no matter what the storm is, even if we can't remember it and get back to it, that there's always a peace deep inside of us. We may not always feel it, but it's always there when we're in touch with what just is. So before I started the sermon today, I felt that moment of trepidation that if you've lost someone very close to you, if you've are just feeling down today, I don't want to minimize that with the sermon. I can't know what you're going through today. We did a service last week where I said, I hope if the grief is too immediate, that you will consider this a time capsule for your heart down the road when things are feeling better, to return to this truth. I mean, you wouldn't be human if you didn't question whether life makes any sense whatsoever in these conditions. But I think the symbol God, if we don't turn it into a human being, if we don't make it mythological, if we don't make it superstitious, is a reminder that there's some depth out of which we come. No matter what, whether it's a being or being, we can't know that. It's a mystery. We come from a deep source. And because every particle in the universe resonates with every other particle, life speaks to us. It addresses us. And if we become still, we can hear that music in life. We can feel ourselves addressed by life. And finally, it reminds us that for all the storms, for all the waves, that really life is one, reality is one. And the divisions that we form in our mind, the separations, those are delusion. And that the symbol reminds us that we're interconnected with everything that is. So the psalmist is definitely not pretending that life is going to go easy. The psalmist is not saying form a relationship with a hypothetical being that you can't find. But it is saying that there's something beneath life's storms. It's an invitation to go deeper into your own life and sit with what is. Be still and know that I'm God. The psalmist seems to know very well that there are storms, earthquakes, pandemics, and heartbreaks in life, and nothing is going to change that. But the psalmist also knows that there is a river running through it all that heals the human heart and gives us peace. Well, that's my attempts to understand our psalm today. We take a moment where you think what these words might mean to you.